As far as healthcare people are concerned in Washington, I'm sort of unique. As president of the Federation of American Hospitals, I've worked for hospitals for the last 10 years. Prior to that, I worked for the health insurance industry at the Health Insurance Association of America, where I also was president and CEO, as well as having other posts. And I worked on Capitol Hill for 13 years, both on the Senate side and the House side. At one point was staff director for the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that oversees the Medicare program and other tax-related issues where health care comes up. So I've got a rounded background, and not just seeing it from the policymaking side, the advocacy side, the payer side, the provider side, but I also think I bring sort of a nuanced understanding of how policy is made, what its implications are, and how it affects the real world. The United States really has the best and maybe the worst of healthcare. On the one side, in the United States, you can get better healthcare, better medical services, more high-tech medical services than anywhere else in the world. You can see the best trained doctors in the best institutions that there are. On the other hand, we have so much, and because we have a system where if you have insurance, you really have open-ended availability of health care, that we frequently provide too much. And whether it's drugs or imaging or whatever, part of our problem is that we have too much available. At the same time, we have low-income Americans who either lack insurance, or even if they're on welfare or Medicaid, may lack access to health care because the government, the state governments in the case of Medicaid, don't pay enough for providers and clinicians to provide the same level of care they provide to others. So, as many things in terms of comparing America to other parts of the world, we sort of have the best and the worst. You know, part of the problem with looking at issues like obesity, smoking, drinking, drug abuse, is that those are social issues as well as healthcare or medical issues. I worry sometimes that there's so much pressure on the healthcare system, and the assumption is that the doctors and the hospitals and the other healthcare providers are going to solve social ills. Yes, obesity leads to diabetes. Yes, obviously smoking leads to all kinds of horrible illnesses. But in some ways, our healthcare system is really a medical system that's geared to solving the problem once it's there. We've got to look broader, I think, in terms of how we do public health and how we change our culture in order to deal with some of these issues that ultimately, if we don't take care of them early enough, will cost us as a nation tremendously in terms of the medical costs in our, in a sense, responsive medical care system. The United States has never had universal coverage. It's been something since Teddy Roosevelt that's been discussed by many presidents. Obviously in 1965 and 66, the Medicare-Medicaid programs were enacted and brought to fruition. So at least for seniors and some indigent, they had, in a sense, national health insurance. President Obama and the Democratic Congress decided once he was elected that their major project, other than jobs, was going to be health care. And they focused on providing universal coverage through a massive set, because there really were two, health care bills. They passed it, but in a very partisan way. That was, from their standpoint, the only way they could pass it. So the Republicans disagreed with many of the fiscal and health assumptions behind the legislation. So what do we face today? In the midterm elections that we just had, the president's party lost. They lost the House of Representatives and they lost ground in the Senate. And so we're at a position now where the administration, President Obama's administration, is moving forward with implementing health reform. Yet we have Republicans in the House and many Republicans in the Senate that oppose health reform. They've both already voted to repeal it. And at the same time, we have the states, many of the states, going to the courts to question some of the basic premises of health reform. And this questioning is going through the courts. So most of health reform, there's some provisions that go into place. They went into place last year or this year. Most of it really is launched in 2014. And so between now and 2014, we're going to find out whether the Republicans or the courts will make a case against health reform, and it'll either be unraveled or significantly changed, or whether the president, his administration, the president will be reelected in November of 12, the courts won't slow him down, and in 2014, we'll get the universal coverage that was passed by the president's party just a few months ago. Dealing with health care costs is a complicated matter. Americans, in a sense, want it all. We have a health care system that can provide it all if it can be funded. At the same time, getting it all is very expensive. We're the most expensive health care system in gross or per person in the world. The question is, how can we rein in on that? In the health reform legislation that the President and Democrats in Congress passed, there is delivery reform, particularly on the Medicare side of the slate. There are provisions that should bring doctors and hospitals together, bring them more in alignment, hopefully improve the quality of care, and in doing that, reduce the need for hospitalizations, reduce the need for other services that are very costly. The bill doesn't come to grips, though, with the overarching gross healthcare costs of the nation. It just sort of makes some changes at the edges in Medicare. And the big question, I think, for the next generation of policymaking, assuming that universal coverage and this health reform goes forward in 2014, will be, how do we make the constraint and where does it come from? You know, there are really only a few ways to constrain healthcare costs. Either less services are going to be provided, people are going to pay more for those services, maybe more out of pocket, which will reduce use, or the government, through a regulatory fashion, will just cap things. That could end up in, less revenues for providers and clinicians, and maybe also just less services being available. Maybe the R word, maybe some rationing, indirect or direct. I think the jury's still out as to which avenue we'll choose, but eventually we probably will have to apply great constraint because we have a system that's not affordable over the next many decades.